You are lazy. I mean that specifically, not as an insult you can brush off. I mean it in the exact clinical sense, and by the end of this, you'll understand why that word applies to you even on the days you feel like you got a lot done, because laziness was never what you were told it was. I'm not talking about people doing nothing. This is about the ones who never stop moving, answering messages at 11 p.m., color-coding a to-do list, opening 17 tabs of research, and at the end of the day, nothing that actually mattered got touched. There's a particular kind of person who's built an entire identity around being busy, because busy is the most sophisticated form laziness has ever taken. It lets them avoid the one or two things that would actually change their life without ever having to admit that's what they're doing, and without anyone, including them, ever calling it what it is. Here's the belief you walked in with. Laziness looks like a person on a couch wanting nothing. That definition is outdated, and it's been letting you off the hook. Real laziness learned a long time ago that stillness gets noticed and judged, so it evolved. It put on running shoes. Now it looks exactly like ambition, which is why almost nobody catches it in themselves, including, statistically, you. By the end of this, you'll recognize a moment from this week where you did this to yourself in real time and didn't clock it. And I'll show you the actual switch, not a mindset trick, a neurological one that separates people who quietly compound their lives for a decade from people who stay busy and lazy for a decade and arrive nowhere. Start with the biology. Your brain doesn't release dopamine for accomplishment. It releases dopamine for closing small, low-friction loops. Checking an email off a list gives nearly the same hit as finishing real work. Your brain cannot tell the difference between meaningful progress and motion that resembles progress. It just wants the loop closed, and once it learns easy loops are available, it steers you toward them whenever a hard loop is nearby, without asking permission. That is laziness at the level of brain chemistry. It's not a lack of movement, it's a preference for the cheapest available loop dressed up as diligence. You sit down to do the real thing, the proposal, the business, the hard conversation. Within 4 minutes, your hands are doing something else. Not a decision. Some part of your nervous system detected risk and rerouted you towards something that feels like productivity but carries none of the exposure. You end the day having done a lot. None of it moved the needle. Some part of you knew that at 9 a.m. and chose the 12 easy things anyway, because the easy things were laziness in a productive-looking outfit, and the outfit worked, including on you. Uncomfortable truth number 1, busy is laziness that's evolved a defense mechanism. Call someone out on this, and they'll get genuinely offended because the evidence of effort is real. It's just aimed at the wrong target, at the cheapest available target, which is the actual definition of laziness nobody gave you growing up. Here's the mechanism underneath the mechanism. Your threat detection system doesn't distinguish between a tiger and a task with social consequences attached, a cold email that might get rejected, a project that might reveal you're not as talented as you hoped. To your nervous system, these register as actual danger because failing might mean something real about who you are. So it manufactures a detour disguised as diligence and picks the path of least resistance every single time it's given the choice, which again is the entire mechanism of laziness just running through a nervous system sophisticated enough to disguise itself as effort instead of admitting what it's actually optimizing for. This is why willpower was never the right lens for this. Willpower assumes the problem is a lack of effort. It isn't. The person avoiding the real task is often expending more energy than the person doing it, just aimed sideways into 100 small evasions instead of one direct confrontation. That sideways aim is still laziness. Laziness was never about how much energy you spent. It's about consistently spending it on whatever costs you the least exposure and calling the result a full day. Think of the person who's told everyone for years that this is the year, who's put in real hours on things that orbit the goal without touching its center, built the website, never launched it, done the research, never made the call, written 40 pages of notes for the book, never opened a blank page and written page 1, because page 1 is the only page that can be judged, and everything before it was the laziest possible version of effort available, engineered to feel like progress while carrying zero risk. There's a second version of this person, quieter, that you've probably also been. The one who says yes to every request that lands in their inbox, who fills their calendar with other people's priorities, who calls it being generous or being a team player, when what's actually happening is that a calendar full of other people's tasks is a calendar with no room left for the one task that would expose them if it failed. Helping everyone else is real work. It's also the laziest available option when the alternative is your own name on the line. If your stomach just dropped a little, that's not an accident. That's your own pattern recognition catching up. So, hit subscribe, because this channel exists to expose mechanisms exactly like this one. Then, go to the comments and name the one task you've been circling for weeks without landing on. Not the vague version, the actual task. Naming it publicly removes the plausible deniability that lets the avoidance keep going unchallenged. I read these. Now, let's keep going, because the next part flips the whole thing. Here's the inversion. People genuinely producing, quietly, consistently, often look, from a distance, less busy than the person drowning in tasks. Fewer open tabs, fewer color-coded planners. They've already done the internal work of identifying the 2 or 3 things that matter and stripped away the rest. To someone trained to equate visible effort with value, this can look almost lazy, which creates a perverse dynamic. The person doing high leverage work gets socially punished for looking calm, while the person actually running on laziness gets praised for their visible suffering, because suffering reads as commitment, even when it's pointed nowhere. None of this happens in a vacuum. You were trained, probably before age 10, in an environment that rewarded visible effort over invisible results, praised for staying late regardless of what got finished. Your nervous system learned an equation: looking effortful equals valued, valued equals safe. So, even now, some part of you isn't optimizing for outcomes, it's optimizing for the appearance of strain, because strain is what got rewarded, and the laziest path available is always the one that gets you the appearance without the risk. There's a system-level layer to this too, worth naming, because it explains why the pattern doesn't fix itself, even once you understand it. Every platform you use, every workplace culture you're embedded in, is quietly rewarding the appearance of effort, because appearance is measurable and depth isn't. A manager can see you online at 9 p.m. They cannot see whether the 2 hours you spent were aimed at anything that mattered. An algorithm can see you posted daily. It cannot see whether any of it moved you closer to anything real. So the entire environment around you is quietly training you to be lazy in the most efficient, least detectable way possible, and calling it commitment.
So, how do you actually break this? First, the identity risk audit. Before you work, ask, does this task risk being judged, or does it just risk being boring? Boring tasks need structure and a timer. Identity risk tasks need you to name the fear out loud first, because an unnamed fear runs your behavior silently, and a named fear can be consciously overridden. Say it plainly. I'm avoiding this because if I send it and get rejected, I'll have real evidence I'm not good enough. Say that sentence out loud, and the laziness loses its disguise. Second, audit your busy list nightly with one question. Which of these, if skipped entirely, would have changed nothing in 6 months? Most tasks fail this test. Once you run this audit nightly, you start feeling real discomfort doing low-stakes work while the high-stakes task sits untouched, because you've made the laziness visible to yourself, and visible laziness is much harder to keep repeating. Third, the one almost nobody does because it takes nerve. Do the identity risk task first, before anything else, while your willpower is highest and excuses are thinnest. Not because mornings are magic, because the scary task will always lose against a list of easy wins later in the day, unless you remove the competition entirely. Fourth, and this one is smaller, but it matters more than it sounds like it should, stop measuring your day by how full it looks. Measure it by whether the one task that could have exposed you got touched. A day where you did less, on paper, but moved the real thing forward by an inch is worth more than a day where you closed 20 loops that were never actually load-bearing. This will feel wrong at first, because you have spent years being rewarded for the 20 loops. Do it anyway. The discomfort is the software updating. One more layer. Busy feels like control. Real high-stakes work feels like exposure. Given the choice, a nervous system chooses control every time, even when that control is an illusion built out of low-value tasks. The laziest possible illusion because it costs almost nothing and pays out in the appearance of virtue. This is why understanding the mechanism once isn't enough. You'll feel the pullback toward busy again, especially when the real work gets hard. That pull isn't a personality flaw you eliminate once. It's a default setting under pressure. The fix isn't eliminating the pull. It's noticing it the moment it starts and building, deliberately, a small history of moments where you noticed it and moved toward the real task anyway. So stop asking whether you're a hard worker. That question flatters you and changes nothing. Start asking at the end of each day where the real risk in your life is sitting untouched while you stayed lazy around its edges, dressed as busy. Hunting the untouched risk instead of counting completed tasks, that's the actual line between people who look productive for a decade and people who quietly become unrecognizable in the same span of time. You already know which task it is. You knew before I said any of this. The only thing that's changed is you can no longer pretend you're exactly who this video was about.